We'll get started in just a few minutes. Let some folks arrive. We'll get going at about 3 after 2 p.m. So give folks a few more minutes to hop on in from their last meeting. All right, let's hop into this, get moving. So good afternoon, welcome. My name is Neil Barrett. I'm the External Affairs Officer for OHCS Disaster Recovery and Resilience. So again, thank you for being here. If you were forwarded this invite and you're not exactly sure what meeting you're at, this is OHCS Disaster Recovery and Resiliency Monthly Update. So this will be our first of what we plan to be a monthly occurrence to keep our partners in disaster recovery informed and up to date. So before we get into the agenda and some housekeeping items, OHCS Deputy Director Caleb Yant has a few words he would like to share with y'all. So Caleb, take it away.
Thank you, Neil. Good afternoon, everyone. As Neil said, my name is Caleb Yant. I use he, his, him pronouns. I'm the Deputy Director here at OHCS. Looking at the list of attendees, I know that I've met many of you in the past. I know for some this might be our first virtual meeting. So thank you for being here today, and thank you for the continued support in our varied roles of our communities. It's been some time since we've taken the opportunity to kind of share updates on many of the state-funded projects as well as our reorg and programming. And so a lot of what you're going to see today, and Neil will take you through, are some of those updates that we'll walk through. One update that I just wanted to provide, because I know some members of that are out here, some of the names I see have been part of this, is on the disaster recovery and resilience director recruitment. I think many of you are aware that we're currently in the recruitment process for the next director of the disaster recovery and resilience division. We engaged with Modus, which is a recruiting firm. And one of the reasons that we did that is we wanted to seek input both from our internal teams within OHCS, also from state government executive branch partners, and also with external partners. And the posting for that position recently closed on October 11th, so just last week. One of the reasons we chose to have Modus to partner with us was to really understand from partners what is needed for the next disaster recovery and resilience director at OHCS. We ended up with a large pool of candidates, which is really, really exciting to be in that situation. And those candidates are currently being screened to understand which ones are going to interviews. And that screening criteria is really based off the needs and what we heard through those listening sessions. So as far as updates, we'll be conducting interviews starting next week. In the next few weeks, we'll be doing a couple rounds of interviews. So we look forward to introducing the next leader in the next month or so for the disaster recovery director. I also, just before we get into the updates, want to take a moment to just appreciate everyone that is on here for providing feedback over the last few months that is leading to the substantial action plan amendment process. We'll be going through how we are amending our action plan that we submit to HUD for the programming of the reorg and programs. And this really has allowed us to make meaningful adjustments to our programs that are in support of the things that you all said that you needed. I think relatedly, one of the things that I want to be clear on is intentions moving forward related to communication and engagement on the part of our team at OHCS, the Disaster Recovery and Resiliency Division. We really want to make sure we're able to be responsive to make changes based on the feedback we hear, and also be able to be timely in programmatic updates as well as opportunities for us to be able to collaborate together. This is hard work. It's difficult. We know folks have been waiting for too long to find themselves recovered. We'll walk through some of the information here. We're confident that, and we see really great momentum, and expect to have more money flowing and more people moving into homes soon. But really, our partnerships with you all, regardless of the scope, function, and form of that partnerships, it really allows us to best support our communities. So I just want to, start with kind of appreciation for the tireless work that we continue to do together. And with that, I'll turn it over to Neil to kind of go through the agenda items and the updates that we have.
Thank you very much, Caleb. Yeah, and we'll walk through the agenda. So we got through the welcome, so we're clicking along here. We'll briefly talk about sort of the purpose of putting these meetings together, these updates together each month. We'll spend a little bit of time on our DRR funded projects, and then also our reorg and programming, and then we'll get into probably the topic most folks are interested in is the substantial action plan amendment. If you'd like to participate in this little webinar, you can use the Q&A function to provide questions or comments in that, and then we will gather those up and provide responses to that. With the size of the audience in this meeting, opening it up to open Q&A, we might be here all day. So we'll gather all your questions and respond to you shortly. So moving on to the purpose of why we wanted to put these together. The obvious is to plan on providing updates each month on state-funded projects, as they progress, and some of them will soon close out, as well as status updates for reorg and programming that's already underway. And also, if we've learned anything about CDBG-DR funding, it's super complicated and nuanced. We learn something new basically every day, and so as we gain that knowledge and understanding, we want the ability to share that out, because as more folks have a deeper understanding of this work, it just creates more opportunities to collaborate and be creative in the support of fire survivors. Another purpose for bringing these together is we're also aware that misinformation is detrimental to the recovery process, and particularly at the expense of survivors. And so part of this hope is that these updates will provide more clarity across a broader range of partners and community leaders so that we are able to support our fire survivors the best we can. So we'll switch gears into our DRR funded projects. So we'll start with the Wildfire Recovery and Resilience Account, known locally as WIRA. And so since this is the first monthly update of this kind, we wanted to share some successes that we've had to date before we get into the reorgan programming. And so just a recap, in 2020, Oregonians lost 4,400 housing units to the devastating fires that impacted, multiple parts of the state. And so fortunately for to the Oregon legislature and other federal partners, and most of you on this call, we had the ability to help hundreds of families, both with temporary and permanent housing. And so WIRA supported 450 households with intermediate temporary housing that included shelters, short-term rentals, and fortified properties. Many of these same households receiving support with intermediate and temporary housing were also supported with other WIRA activities, including permanent housing. WIRA supported 876 households with permanent housing, making a significant amount of progress before the CDBG-DR funding became available. And one thing that we're proud of and we wanted to note was that the FEMA Direct Housing Mission, known as the FEMA Trailers, was closed in the spring of 2022. And with that, no survivors were left without a home. And nationally, as a trend, that's not something that's very common. And so we wanted to, highlight the talented community action agencies that support the WIRA funding and made that possible to make sure our survivors were housed. A few more updates on state-funded projects. We have a few photos pictured here and some home ownership projects to highlight. Talent Mobile Estates in Jackson County, which will have 75 homes. They've all been delivered, and some families have already begun to receive keys, which is super exciting. Another exciting development this past week, Lazy Days started receiving its first 10 units up in the McKenzie Valley, just east of Blue River. So they'll receive 10 units by the end of this week, and then another 10 will be delivered by mid-November. Also in Jackson County, New Spirit Village, which will ultimately have 84 units. They're now accepting applications. And then on the renter side, Orchard Meadows and Prescott Gardens combined 196 rental units, and they began accepting applications over this past summer. Also in Jackson County, Talent Senior Apartments, which will have 22 rental units. I had the pleasure of going to a ribbon cutting there a few weeks ago. It's a fantastic site, and they are currently accepting applications as well. And then the Depot Bay Townhomes will have 12 rental units, and they're anticipated to break ground this spring. And we'll transition to some reorgan updates. And we'll start with the Homeowner Assistance and Reconstruction Program, known as HARP. And so exciting news with HARP is that we anticipate to make our first awards next week. And so as we know, we've been through this application process since April or May. And so it's just really exciting to have some folks get through all the way to the award process, and they can start looking for homes. Another piece of HARP is that we did a pivot to a homeowner managed construction. Originally, we planned on a state managed construction, but the launch of that was not moving fast enough to keep pace with our HARP applicants. So the program pivoted to a homeowner managed option that will allow folks to move quicker through the program. And so home purchasing for move-in ready manufactured homes or stick-built homes will go first for home buyers that don't have existing property and want to pursue this option. Maximum award amounts have been increased across the board to better reflect market demand, and these changes are all reflected in the action plan amendment, which we will talk about in a little while. And moving on to PEER, the Planning, Infrastructure, and Economic Revitalization Program. Currently, 17 projects have been approved by selection committees, 3 of which have been approved by OHCS. Most of the selection committees have finished their first round of awards, and there are 3 selection committees still in the process of making selections. And as I said, OHCS has approved 3 projects. One subrecipient, IV Can Do in Jackson County, received their award letter dated in mid-September for an economic revitalization project. We also have 3 subrecipient grant agreements that are being drafted and will be soon with subrecipients for their review and signature. So a lot of moving pieces in peer and expecting a lot of projects to start moving through this process. And so the action plan amendment, several of our reorgan program updates relate to an action plan amendment that is currently posted on the reorgan website. So I'll cover those as part of this update as well. So we will start with the Homeownership Opportunity Program changes, or what we know as HOP. And so the Homeownership Opportunities Program in the current HUD approved action plan that was work was done on that a couple of years ago. So the current action plan included 2 potential assistance options for renters. Those were down payment assistance to support homeownership for first-time home buyers, and then also the construction of housing to create homeownership opportunities for current renters. And so after working directly with many of the people on this call and designing the program, we heard clear feedback that counties wanted more flexibility with the construction pathway in particular. So you'll note that we have retained all of the elements of the original HOP program, but are eliminating it as a named program in the action plan with this amendment. So we've been using HOP for the past year or longer. We're going to have to remove HOP from our vocabulary, but I think we'll be okay. And so moving on, some more homeownership opportunity program changes. So in response to the feedback we heard from counties and our local partners, we've carved out the construction portion of HOP program into a new program called Affordable Housing Development, or AHD. So this is our new acronym we get to learn, replacing HOP. So AHD is something we'll start to talk about quite a bit. And we've expanded the eligible uses of these funds to allow more local control over what housing options work best for communities. And so with the elimination of HOP, we created a new program called Housing Support Services, which will include down payment assistance, but also rental assistance from Intermediate Housing Assistance, or IHA, and housing counseling support. And the goal of including all 3 of these renter-focused options under one program is to provide coordinated entry to renters and a menu they can choose from to identify the right options for their specific needs. And so some renters will want rental assistance and housing counseling, but won't be ready for home ownership. Others may be candidates for housing counseling alone. And so whichever options they choose, the coordinated entry point makes for less paperwork, more intuitive process, and simpler administration for ourselves and for our partners. Digging in a little further on affordable housing development, or AHD. So this program provides counties with flexible funding to address the disaster's impact on the local affordable housing stock. So counties can pursue new construction of housing for renters or for homeownership, the rehabilitation of existing substandard housing to increase affordable housing options, or infrastructure that facilitates affordable housing. So this program will have local control of policies and program requirements. OHCS is allocating CDBG-DR funding directly to county governments or their designees, and they'll either pursue with public housing authorities or local governments within that jurisdiction for a broad range of affordable rental and homeownership development activities that primarily benefit fire impacted low to moderate income households in those eligible counties. And this will include new housing development and rehabilitation, as well as land acquisition and infrastructure development that's necessary for housing development and rehabilitation. The SAPA also provides or proposes to move approximately $30 million from HARP to the AHD program. Also within the SAPA is HARP reimbursement. Again, based on feedback from applicants and the community, this action plan amendment adds reimbursement as a potential benefit for applicants that meet eligibility criteria. and are below 120% of area median income and can demonstrate eligible expenses not covered by other sources of assistance. Currently, these expenses must have been incurred prior to February 3rd, 2023. That's based on federal requirements. But currently, OHCS, we're seeking a waiver to this requirement to allow for expenses incurred after this date. Households will be eligible for up to $100,000 based on a review of their documented expenses and netting out any duplicative assistance received. Reimbursement rollout will be phased, and like all previous HARP assistance, is subject to available resources. Applicants that are currently receiving assistance with repair or reconstruction from HARP will be in the first phase, followed by applicants with incomes below 80% of area median income, and then finally applicants with incomes below 120% of area median income. And some other SAPA updates. So within the action plan, we reorganized to more clearly detail the 4 program options within HARP. So reconstruction, rehabilitation, manufactured home replacement, and home purchase. And so this includes both reorgan managed and homeowner managed projects, as well as maximum award amounts that have been updated to better reflect market conditions. One option that we moved from HARP to AHD is the option for accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. So this has been moved as an eligible activity in the AHD program, where counties have the option to pursue ADUs or use this funding for other affordable housing needs. And in total, a total of 39 million will be redistributed from HARP to support the redesign of housing programs and activity delivery needs. And so we are in the middle of our SAPA. And so right now we are open for public comment, and we will have public hearings beginning next week. So members of the public are invited to provide their input on the draft action plan amendment through a 30-day comment period, during which OHCS will seek input through public hearings, an online form, email, mail, or telephone, all of which you can see on the screen, opportunities to engage. And the public hearings, if you're able to attend, which we hope you are, they'll have a short presentation by OHCS officials and then followed by public feedback. All comments need to be submitted to OHCS no later than 11:59 on November 8th, and all public hearings will be held at facilities that are accessible to individuals living with disabilities. All residents will have equal access to the information, including persons with disabilities and limited English proficiency. For folks who can't attend in person, there will also be a virtual hearing on Zoom from 6 to 8 p.m. on Wednesday, October 30th. And moving on to housing support services. So the first one we'll talk about is intermediate housing assistance, or IHA. And the housing support services program has 3 pathways. The first, as I mentioned, intermediate housing assistance, or IHA, was already in the action plan and provides rental assistance. This will continue the benefits for existing ERA2 participants who are already receiving rental assistance. So these existing rental assistance recipients will see a gradual increase in the percent of their income they'll provide toward their rent over the course of 3 months, eventually capping at 30% required by IHA. And once these existing rent assistance recipients have been transitioned into the IHA program, OHCS will then open an application for all 3 pathways of housing support services, including any new households that require rent assistance, or existing and new households that are seeking down payment assistance or housing counseling. And to decrease the burden on participants, we've created a single application that will be used by all 3 housing support services programs, with sections that are optional based on which pathway applicants are interested in pursuing. Moving on to down payment assistance, or DPA. I'm sure you are all loving the acronyms today. So as part of the Housing Support Services application, applicants can pursue down payment assistance towards a new home. This will provide households with a verified residential loss from the disaster, earning up to 120% of the area median income, the opportunity to purchase a home by providing financial assistance towards eligible closing costs, and the purchase price of a new or pre-owned manufactured housing unit or a single-family stick-built home or a condo or a townhouse in buildings with less than 4 units. And finally, housing counseling. So regardless of the eligibility for rent assistance or down payment assistance, some applicants will be offered housing counseling services to help with homeownership preparedness or housing stabilization. So that could be home buyer education and counseling, help with budgeting. Some folks may need support from legal services, and then also helping folks navigate which program might fit best for them, whether that's IHA or DPA. And so we have come to the conclusion of our updates for the day. Want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. And as we progress each month with updates, we hope to be able to celebrate some of the wins, as folks are receiving awards and peer projects are getting underway. And we also hope to build on these updates. And as programs move deeper into implementation, we intend to provide statistics and data around reorgan as we see programs progress throughout their life cycle. And please always feel free to reach out anytime with questions. We'd love to hear from you. Hope you all have a great day, and I hope we see you in the next couple weeks as we're traveling throughout the state for the SAPLA public hearings. And with that, I hope you have a fantastic weekend and have a great day.
Hey, Neil, really quickly, can we just, as far as some of the questions we didn't have a chance to get to in here, or how are we going to follow up with that?
Oh, yeah. So we're gonna take those questions in and then reply back to those folks.
Okay. Thank you.